Okay, so I think one meeting point is to consider how inner dance has been here for about 16 to 17 years. And there are a lot of practices that have come from the formats that had emerged out of inner dance in Southeast Asia that now has many names. There's a lot of talk and questions about Kundalini activation. So we just have to be clear on the timelines and where these things began and what inner dance had brought into influence that goes way back. So we're not here to create distinctions. I think one healthy way is to approach things from a unitive space where a lot of us are actually just doing the same thing. So what we offer would be more than notes. It doesn't matter to me what you call it, like what do you call it? I don't care what names we give something. I think what we're interested in is consciousness itself. What is the nature of the species, the human that has been on Earth for a long time. So I'm really happy to be in Dubai and in the Middle East in general today with you. There's a lot happening in the Middle East, as we well know. This probably isn't just about the conflict that is in the news right now. There's also the talk on planet Earth and the climate. Inner Dance Wise, there's also a big event where inner dance is being represented in a big science and spirituality conference that I think starts a couple of days from now. So there's a lot of messages in my inbox that's concerning the U.A.E. and Dubai. And inner dance has always been there. And I'm not talking about just what people like Flor and Noha and others have contributed. The energy is really, really old. It belongs to deep history. So I hope humbly that I can elaborate at least what have we learned over the last almost 20 years that's coming from the Global Notebook. What have we learned from the inner dance experience in Egypt, Africa, in Europe, Australia, the Americas, the Middle East, and of course, Asia, where the biggest populations in the world are coming from. So I'm really interested in the science. I think we can redefine science because we have these definitions of what science needs to be, something evidence-based, something empirical. I think science is really just more of what comes as a holistic understanding. What are the truth conditions by which we can all agree objectively on a sense of universality, so that what is considered true would be the same in the West and in the East, the North, and the South. I think that would be a healthy way to start out. And I think energy is a really good entry point. There's a lot of translations happening now. And we're not just talking about from language to language. I think when it comes to the work that we do, how does this become practical? So over the years, we've worked a lot with governments, businesses, schools, jails, companies, advocacies, NGOs. So this seems to be ramping up now, and more, I think we want to bring this out in the open. I think this would be really relevant in places like the Middle East, where a lot of the spiritual work tends to happen in secret, maybe in yoga centers, ashrams, and closed doors. Like, how do we bring this out using language that's not adversarial? And for that reason, the science is really relevant at this time. How do we adopt a language that is not threatening, that is Sorry, it's this mosquito that's liking me.
We also have here.
I'm trying to. What is a language that could be spoken that could speak all the way to the prime minister, the president of China, that would be just as relevant to global religions, right? What's a unitive languaging that would encompass a trust? So I think that has been the inner dance journeys. And the Philippines, were in a really exciting time. We're working not just with schools, we're working with the Department of Education system, where we're already modeling curriculums. We're building classrooms out of garbage and mud house materials. And the first donor that actually made this happen is a lady from Dubai named Marita, who's a close friend of Inner Dance and Flor. So there's some kind of partnership that enables the Philippines to model this. The Philippines, basically, as you might well know through Flor, it's basically the most disaster-struck country on the planet, arguably. The strongest storms hit the Philippines. It's in the Ring of Fire. So just yesterday, 7.5 earthquake hit the southern part. So there's something about chaos that comes with this energy that brings about a higher organization. It's not always easy to see. It's interesting to see what it means to mess things up that allows us to see patterns that normally won't be seen. That has something to do with the tropics, the climate of abundance, but also the ability to keep reconstructing things from the ground up or from the 0 point. Inner dance is well known to be really good at bringing about chaos. But what do we know about the opposite? What does it mean to organize the earth, the mind? So there have been so many learnings over the years, and we actually know a lot about the brain and the nervous system. This is becoming more and more interesting for people. Like when we lay down and when we expose ourselves to certain stimulus, we alter not just the states of perception, but also the brain. The brain is changing, the nervous system is changing, and that's not just from a personal space. The planet is becoming a central nervous system. And as proof of concept, we're together now using that system. Yesterday, I was in a Zoom call with Spain. Every week, I'm doing these calls with Africa, with Europe, with the Americas, and it's all about electricity. It's all about information. So I feel we have to study the brain together because we're experiencing it. The brain of the planet is something that comes up after the death of the ego. A lot of people wonder, okay, after I undergo the death of my limitations, my persona, my small self, what would come after? It's the birthing of the planet through you. Like something would grow that is super old, it's super ancient. So the study of the brain, it needs to come hugely because we are experiencing it. There might be scientists and academics out there that could be really good at speaking and studying about this topic, but how would this reflect on people who are not just talking about it, but are actually experiencing it? So I've been interested in the brain as a core topic, along with many other core topics. I'm interested in language. I'm interested in culture. I'm interested in time and space. I'm interested in the mind. I'm interested in the whole body in general. I like to look at the whole and the many parts. um, because I'm interested in the grounding process. Like I spend a lot of time with school principals, parents, teachers, government officials, and I need to be able to speak to them. So I don't always just borrow terminologies coming from New Age communities and spiritual traditions. I come from the biggest Catholic population in Asia. You're talking maybe 85%. So I want to be able to work within the system, not to create an alternative. I want to dive deep inside the matrix, just as Neo did after going through his own death, in order to find something a lot more inclusive. So I'm really careful with the way I language things. So I feel from Palawan to Dubai, one conversation we could take up is dimensionality. Dimensionality is a topic that could traverse a host of other topics. Um, Now, when people come to these gatherings, there are questions, either clear or gray. Um, where is it coming from? Why is it happening? What is the role of the space holder? Why do we use music at all? Are there different journeys that can happen depending on the nature of the stimulus? When the movements come, do they mean anything? Are we just making it up? Or is there some sort of universality that holds a constant? Um, how do we deem that one is integrating as opposed to bypassing or escaping? These are really deep questions, and I'm really happy to say that there are actual answers to these. The answers are not easy to hold in a linear, static fashion. There's some vulnerability to some of the understandings because of just how vast the experience is, and the brain state isn't always easy to hold. What would work as a way of studying this is there has to be some cross-conceptual thinking where many domains of understanding actually need to come together in what philosophy is called structuralism, which is a perspective in which you can understand, let's say, the human through the, let's say, the historicist understanding of what was the origins of language, the brain, mind, the body, culture. We need to borrow a lot of these different truths. Very often it's so easy to invalidate that, okay, there's this one truth that's better than the other truth, but there could be some dimensionality where all truths actually, they don't go to war. There's a dimensionality where everything, in fact, are everything represents parts of a whole puzzle or a mapping, and often we could go there. We could go there in the dream state, in the inner dance, and that people call the Kundalini rising experience. You could go there through the psychedelic journey. Most especially, we would go there in the near-death experience where the life review situates in just a split moment, like the totality of everything we've been through in relation to the absolute that holds context for the being, the organism, the individual. While we're here, it would be interesting to slow down the thinking process. So we're not looking at everything all at once. We could go into a sequential thinking process in time where we can use language and unravel things one at a time, whilst also doing this cross-conceptual thinking process where we could talk about everything, bring up certain things one at a time, but somehow we're talking about the same thing and going around in circles. We actually clarify the big picture, which I feel is what a lot of people are searching for, the The big questions were the small questions we were asking when we were young. And we didn't get answers to these. Schools like to fragment thinking process. So does media, so does mom and dad. When we start asking, well, why? Why am I here? Why does the sun come up? We can answer that from a mythological space. Religion is an easy way. God just created it. Allah just made it that way. Stop asking questions. Science is really good, but the kinds of answers science gives is very fragmentary. It's very divisive almost. So there is a lot of attraction in the spiritual awakening because a sense of wholeness comes. But when you go back from space to time, there's a kind of training that happens, developmentally speaking. We go back to the wholeness that is so prevalent in the brain state of the baby. And when we go back into a second adulthood, not just a second childhood, there's a regrowth where we may access not just the mind, but even language processed in the same way. And before that happens, we live in energy. And we like to use music because music is the art form that holds the most vibrationality. Frequencies, amplitudes, rhythm, texture, tonality, harmony. That's a lot closer to the origins of consciousness in the pre-verbal historicity, which we all share. We were all cousins and brothers and sisters of each other. So yeah, that's maybe just an entry point. I'd like to substantiate certain claims that inner dance brings to the world related to not just who am I, who are we, but what are we becoming? How do we hold a theory of evolution, trusting that what is happening to us is leading to some kind of change, some sort of higher potentiality that isn't just going to be for one master and one guru and one teacher. We're interested in how evolution can happen for each and every being. Were this to be systematized well, this would be shared generously. And so we would not just adopt business models in which the energy is now becoming an exciting spiritual industry for many, because it's really exciting when you normally put up a business. You need capital, you need to like stress yourself out with overhead, with work. And when the business commodity is energy itself, why would that not be interesting for many? So there's this huge excitement because that energy brings about power. For many, it brings about fame. And for many, it brings about like hurrying up, like, okay, we need this fast. And we're not always cognizant of how much the addiction pathways, there are many words for it. It's the mesolimbic pathway, the dopaminergic pathway, it could even be the serotonergic pathway. When you expose people to music and life force energy, techniques in proprioception, in touch, in most sensory modalities, we actually release a lot of hormones and neurotransmitters that lead to addiction cycles. So I'm sure there are good perspectives and super fair perspectives to accrue to the practice that we so enjoy and are interested in now. But we have to admit that there is a kind of spiritual addiction to go with this work, and also the inflation of ego. So handling the maps really objectively and really slowly without judging anyone, just being honest about it, even just in reflection of what's going on inside of us. I had stopped working or teaching in 2017 after conducting the work for about 11 years already, because I wanted to understand. I wanted to know what it was about the addiction pathways in ego. And it was only actually last year where I felt that I was ready to share the notes. So looking around what's happening in the world now, I'm severely interested in what do we prioritize now, and how much do we devote time-wise and space-wise and resource-wise to bring this across. A lot of rooms are filled with mostly Westerners. Like when you look at our work in Asia, a lot of our circles aren't even populated by Filipinos or Asians. A lot of the interest is in coming from countries that are very individualistic, and coming from the history of individualism that may now be interested in the community, in the society. But then a lot of borrowing is happening where ideas and terminologies that belong to ancient India, ancient China, Southeast Asia, Aboriginal Australia, we easily use these terms, and there's a kind of bypassing or cultural appropriation when we're not understanding that a lot of these emerged in their own time and space. So we could look forward to maybe not knowing what we might call these next year, the following years. What I am sure about is people are interested in branding and naming. And on my part, I'm not interested in inner dance itself as a strict nomenclature. When I work with schools, I don't even use the words inner dance. I take up psychology terms. I go straight to the heart of what are we talking about? And it opens doors rather quickly. So I can bump up certain conversations with teachers all the way to regional superintendents and mayors and whatnot, because we don't have to reinvent new terms. We can just find some kind of meeting point that can be just as relevant to a 7-year-old boy or girl, or a conservative, let's say, priest or nun, or a monk or a CEO, congressman or a senator, so that when they Google the words, they wouldn't go like, okay, what is that? Am I okay with my constituents actually looking at it that way? So I feel some of these might be part of our maturation periods, like our growth process. And I'm not like debunking the spiritual awakening community that needs to be protected and held really with a lot of care, because there's so much that can be done there. But coming from parts of the world where so much help is needed, in areas where there are very, very few resources, I think that should also be prioritized. So I'm really careful about how certain things can be introduced in the beginning so that things can scale rather quickly. So when we hold trainings, we don't just do the processes, and we don't just give information. We spend time like on the ground. We go to the schools. We're there with the principals, with the parents. We really go to the ground, and we look for the translation process. Like what would it mean to bring the North and the West into the South and the East? And then what would be the collapse point where we could meet each other exactly as we are? So I find it interesting that a lot of Westerners do borrow a lot from the East and the global South nowadays. And I'm coming from Asia, where it's actually quite interesting, where I'm working with academics and scientists, doctors. I'm training a lot of doctors at the moment. So if the West can borrow a lot from our culture, why not that we can borrow something from the other side, which probably states that we're becoming each other. And maybe if people can present our energy processes in a way that could be quite exciting from the other hemisphere, maybe we can be understood as well. That we have something to say because of our very nonlinear voicing that's finding its own expressions now, that's not exactly linear. So with that, okay, it's getting dark. Can I just open the light here? Um, every training that I've held since 2008 has been visual. So I used to draw using markers on boards. What I could use now is the digital whiteboard. So let me go into a shared screen. Um, okay, so at the end of this talk, I think, oh, wait, why is this gray? Wait, oh, what I'm looking for is black. Where's the black? Ah, okay. Yeah, it's black. Let's talk about dimensionality. Inner dance is a dimension. People might say, okay, or in the third dimension, moving into the fourth, the fifth, it's probably a lot more complex than this. When I think about dimension, here's what I see. So let's take out some letters one at a time. Oh, sorry, I went ahead and did those. That is a dimension. And the question would be like, just how much information is there? We know for a fact that humans are using very, very little brain capacity. We used to think it was just this. And right now, I think we're thinking we're using as much as somewhere in between this and that. So let's say let's reduce that and be conservative. Let's say we're averaging that at 7.5%. So the question is, what's happening to the rest? If I'm doing my math properly, you can correct me if I'm wrong. Like, what is happening to this? So, in the practice that we do, it feels like in the within this is a kind of what is not that, and in the movement, when the body seems to be moving in a certain way, there's in fact a sort of stillness. And so maybe this is possibly who we were. We were quite noisy. Is when you I'm not Flor, so I'm not really a good artist. So maybe I'll try to draw a baby. Okay, just something cute. Let's say we were this. How quiet was it inside this space, the void space, the orange space? Let's borrow certain notes from science just to understand where we came from and possibly where we're going. In the very last week prior to exiting the womb, we were probably, this might not be totally exact, it could be like around this, but we were sleeping 95% of the time. In the gestation period, this is not always the case. We were actually awake sometimes when we were in the womb. Meaning we were conscious and not in the what we would call the sleep stages, either non-REM or REM. And in this 95% of this time, we were also 95% in the REM state. And for those who have studied the dream process that happens in the REM period, which we would look more deeply at later, this is when there are the most information happening, especially if we studied what are called neural oscillations or brain waves. Okay, so the slower brain waves like delta would have more amplitude but less frequencies of waves, and in something like gamma, and there are faster waves in gamma like high oscillating frequencies, which starts to look more and more silent. there's a lot more information. So REM state is when there's a whole spectrum of all of these waves happening all at the same time. So it's almost like we learn to clean up our minds or our brains. That the right now, how much of the day are we sleeping? Let's say we're sleeping about 30% of the day. So we're taught that you need to sleep 8 hours a day. And during that 8 hours, we're experiencing REM state only 15% of the time. So in a way, the chaos or the mess is bringing us somehow back to the brain of the baby. The brain of the baby hosts a lot more brain cells, what are called neurons. There are 100 billion neurons in the baby. And the adult probably has anything in between 50 to maybe 70 or 80, let's say 70 billion neurons. So we actually become less wise, potentially speaking, anyway, the older we get. So in a way, studying this over the last 2 decades, what people call the inner dance experience is in fact the movement from the adult to the baby. I'm not going to go so much into it, but that baby brain has many names. But one of the names is low latent inhibition. And the science on that, which studies the ungating of the filtration mechanisms that creates judgments, creates biases. The more we think we know is the less we do. The less we know about something, we actually potentially know more. So that when we judge someone, then we think we know that person or that culture, that concept in low latent inhibition rather than high latent inhibition, which happens to people undergoing psychosis, spiritual awakenings, crazy or brilliant, or autism. That's what low latent inhibition about. The less we know about something, the more we actually do, and that has something to do with the mimicking, or in a sense, virtually going back into the origin, the original point, the source, as many people call it. So I thought this would be a really good way to start out answering questions. Why is this happening? Where is it coming from? What is it made up? What is it made of, and what is it for? These are the four causations: the efficient, the final, the formal, and the material cause. And most people, when they go into trainings, they want to understand, like, why? Where is this coming from? It has to be coming from somewhere. This is maybe a first answer. We'll elaborate different dimensions of understanding what that means to become a baby later. Let me see. So when Inner Dance first started in 2007, a lot of our frameworks when trainings were beginning was very, very simple. It's really about light. When I lived on this, I wish Flor was here. There's this, let's pretend there's this tree, and this is a coconut tree, and I was living in coconuts for 2 years as a hermit. On this island. Let's say this is me. Let's say I'm just sitting there and having fun. I lived that lifestyle because I was interested in the lightness of the body and the mind. The Philippines is the second largest producer of coconuts in the planet. And interested in what is called true wealth. What does it really mean to become truly wealthy? So in those 2 years, I spent maybe something like $20 living on raw food, mono diet nutrition. And that's where I experienced like unity, like oneness, like everything is just one in both body and mind. It didn't have differentiation anymore. So a lot of what we were sharing in the early years was about certain aspects of let's say in the body there would be something about enzymes and um, let's say shifting the activation of the eyes, the retina, the pupils that then has something to do with the activation of pineal gland that then brings about other effects in the metabolic processes involving like what's happening in the cell itself, which depends on the burning of dense light, not just light, but dense light in the form of fat, protein, or carbohydrates that used to be sugars that were initially given to us by the plants that conducted what was called a photosynthetic process of storing sunlight in the form of sugars. So I was really interested in what would it be like to live directly from the source of light itself. So I underwent a whole training coming partially into a breatharian lifestyle, not just in coconuts. Coconuts is relevant because out of all known foods in the world, coconuts contain the most electrolytes, which means it's the highest source of electricity in all known foods in the planet. But I was actually more interested in going straight to the source. I went into lifestyles of solar gazing, and I just had a direct relationship with the sun. And you are in Dubai right now, where you have a lot of that all the time. So that's the roots of inner dance. Light um, doesn't have to just be that figurative meaning. Um, so I am assuming that a lot of you are interested in facilitating and maybe even training other people in the years to come. Light is a very, very useful metaphor for understanding something you need to account for when you are facilitating. There's something going up and there is something going down. Light isn't just a singular thing. Light is basically a wave that has these two properties, and those specifically would be electricity, and the other would be magnetism. So initially, the drawing was called the Vesica Pisces. Flor might have brought this up. I'm not going to stay on this, but this is really useful in the beginning to account for what was going down, which is magnetism, which signifies the mind, gravity, and then electricity is that which goes up. This is really what light looks like. Basically, it's a double helix as a wave. So when we do study something like the wave itself, which is modeled or mimicking specifically one sleep cycle, which happens in the circadian rhythms, which in inner dance could either model the actual stages of sleep, that being non-REM 1, non-REM 2, non-REM 3, and then shifting into the REM state that is basically the accumulation of delta, theta, alpha, beta, gamma, HOF, and over here might be mu and SMR. Beta, gamma, delta, theta, alpha, beta, gamma. Let's put HOF there. So we're basically deep down waves, and the reason why we do go to sleep at night is to remember the spectrum of waves that kind of oversimplify when we're awake, because beta consciousness is very, very good at solving problems and taking care of children and going to the bank, settling your taxes. But there's a need to situate that whole spectrum, otherwise death or sickness would occur. This is how aging happens when you lose the spectrum itself. So the reason why we do go to sleep is to remember that whole range. So I would go, no, actually, I don't want to go too much into my own story, but there is something to the evolution of the process that had influenced why people use the music the way they do now globally, by the tens of thousands, I would say, not just in the thousands, historically speaking. When I first started music, and I didn't need it per se in the beginning, I would touch people and the movements, the phenomena would happen. People would go into past lives. They would go back to the womb. They would visit the earth. They would go into the cosmos. Music paved the way for more intensity, scalability, maybe safety, because it does provide container that could be easily contextualized to most cultures. It also provides a mirror as to what is being entrained inside us, because music is really embedded in the brain. Musical properties such as rhythm, harmony, melody, texture, tempo, tonality, they're in the brain. Like when you study, let's say the rhythm in music, what you're studying is the heartbeat. When you study harmony in music, what you're studying is the lungs. It's the respiratory system. And when you study melody, texture, and tonality, what you're studying is this is the brain. If let's say this is just one hemisphere, that's central sulcus, and this is the cerebellum and the brainstem. The body is an earth song. The body is built on music. So we created music because the human was that. Especially as consciousness is founded upon something called space and time, sequential thinking, and consciousness in simultaneity. So I think that's I think interesting to understand. So in the musical process that was innovated a long time ago, it's a long story, it's a long evolution. I had been drawing this pattern even before the understanding had come up. There was this whole pattern that is now technically understood as what is called the 12 stages of transformation. I will allow Flor to elaborate on that if there's time. Otherwise, we have documents to speak about the satisfaction, the dissatisfaction, threshold, purgation, disintegration, awakening,
Covered that time.
illumination. We're okay, thank you. So that saves us time. Okay. So that's how we get to this. Now, the reason why this is relevant, and I'm sure you've gone over the autonomic nervous system. Let's go over like some basic maps, because I really want to make sure that we cover this um, in states where the frames connect. When you study the autonomic nervous system, okay, so yeah, you probably understand that there's the fight or flight or freeze response, and then there's the rest, digest, or trust system, which we co-activate. I think what is interesting and useful here is to understand that there are regions that subdivide these two systems. So when you study fear, which is here, fear or excitement, the extensions are from the center of the spine, the thoracolumbar region, the thoracic and the lumbar region, from D1 to L2. The trust and rest and digest system extends from the cranium and the sacrum. So there's a reason why people do hold bodies like in certain particular ways. Why do we, let's say, focus on this region or the solar plexus? Why do we hold the throat area? Why do we go to the hips? It's because when we do that simultaneous co-activation, the spine contains the SNS and PSNS outflows that allow the whole body to communicate with where maps are. For me, brains exist for us to be able to map out the entire the entire being. So in the cognitive sciences, the understanding is the brain isn't really just here. The whole body is actually a brain that works with maps of images, sounds, meanings, balance, pain, pleasure, and so on and so forth. So understanding how the highway system for messaging occurs, one of the things that we would study isn't in fact just the brain. We would probably study not just the organs, which we mentioned is the heart or the brain or the lungs. We'd also study the endocrine system. And we've been mapping out the endocrine system from a chakra-based perspective. When I talk about this, the thyroid, the thymus, the hypothalamus, and the gonads, the adrenal system, they have colors indeed, and there might be ways to relate psychological elements to what also is in the body. So then when we go into the understanding of the circadian rhythms, specifically the sleep stages, it's really important to connect the fact that the circadian rhythms coordinates the autonomic nervous system. They are two very interlinked studies. The sleep cycles and the circadian rhythm studies the evolutionary story in which the autonomic nervous system situates itself within either a 24-hour cycle or a 12-month cycle, which is circadian or circannual system. So this is changing over time, and we want to understand just how much is this in fact changing in the last, I would say, 10 years, if you want to extend that, maybe 20 or 30 years, when media, food habits, lifestyles have shifted, particularly not just in food. When we think about the Middle East, the usage of fossil fuels, oil, gasoline has really allowed information to flow across the world in really abundant ways. So given that, okay, let's say you've covered that, or this is coverable by Flor, how can I maybe extend this so that if you were conducting a long training, let's say you're talking about this over a course of a week or a month or a year, how would you construct a whole spiritual academy that starts out from this basis? So I bring up dimensionality, so that the more you experience this energy, okay, this guy looks like an alien, but when you reveal what is inside, there's something here. So that when you study not just music, but the usage of words and touch and proprioception talks about how do you position the body in a way that the mind or awareness gets shaped. How is the body shaped, and how does the mind shape itself in accordance to let's say when you extend the right arm, which expands the left brain, or when you move even just a leg, how is that mapped out according to the quadrants of the brain, not just the left and right hemisphere, but according to the triune brain theory? The new brain would be the surface area that we call the gray matter. Underneath is white, and this is the new brain. And we've been studying, along with scientists and doctors, the old brain, which we might call the reptilian brain, or the instinctive brain that we do share with other organisms that have not contralateralized brain functions. So for most people, language exists on one hemisphere and music might exist in the other hemisphere. So a lot of questions that might be hanging in the air could be answerable by comparing mappings involving the new and the old brain. So what has been interesting in energy dance is there's some observation as to why is it that the body moves on its own in this autonomic way. So what we found out is that a lot of the activations, we can use some of these terms that are becoming popular now, but to contextualize, activation means the spreading of activation, which are action potentials or neural oscillations that either localize or generalize across the whole brain. So when you start to conduct mappings, for one example is when the eyes start to move on their own, activations are happening in the frontal eye fields. When the body is moving spontaneously, the activations are happening in the what is called the primary or secondary motor cortex, and a lot of that is here. That is very ironic because the part of us that's controlling indeed, which is called the prefrontal cortex, more specifically the dorsolateral prefrontal cortex. This is something we're trying to shut down in the first place, to allow the information to flow throughout the whole body. So this isn't such a simple region. Now, a lot of people ask, why do I not see colors and visions? So a lot of the activations of color and visions happens here. What's called V1, V2. This would be the visual cortex. So were you interested to allow people to journey across space and time? A lot of that actually happens when the body isn't moving anymore. So when techniques and biases are focused on, I want to make the body move, to explode, to go into the catharsis, the so-called kriyas, people don't actually experience the insight, levels of insight and levels of vision, which happen when activations take place in the occipital lobe. The parietal lobe is mostly responsible for sensations, mostly tactile. Sometimes even sexual sensations happen in the parietal lobe. The temporal lobe would be the most often used because this is where the auditory cortex is located. But sharing that space would be memory functions, the entorhinal cortex and the hippocampus is there. And what else is there is smell. So when people use tools such as essential oil, aromatic senses, or yeah, smells, memory, sound, and the olfaction sense, they're all very, very closely interlinked. And the olfaction sense, the sense of smell, is the oldest sense. In the fetus, that was the first developed. So before we developed eyesight or hearing, the oldest memories are actually there. So our long study in dimensionality is based on now that we know that even without an EEG, you might be able to surmise what you're lighting up based on the techniques that you're using, without an electroencephalogram. You can tell, okay, is there a childhood memory coming? Are people crying? Then most likely the activations are here. Those generalizations are very, very well accepted. Is the body moving? Then it's pretty much there. What we have studied in relation to dimensionality is in those experiences where it almost feels like people's bodies aren't moving and people say, okay, I think I fell asleep, but I don't remember. It does feel like so much happened. When you enter into other dimensionalities, the brain isn't activating in a localized way. It's activating as a whole brain system. The spreading of activation is a lot more spread out. And that's usually the beginning stages of the work that we do. So we know obviously that there are two brains. We think it when you say brain, we say okay, brain, but there are two brains. When you look closely, there's a space in between. It's actually two brains. And they basically become one brain when the contralateralization that separates language and music becomes conjoined. And a lot of that is made possible when we are able to send out a lot of electricity, energy, magnetism across the regions, allowing for a real communication to happen. So when people do use the words transmission, there are substantiations for the usage of that word. It's not happening from one person to the next, which does establish dependency, ego, that I'm healing you, I'm sending you energy, I'm so amazing, and you need me. The real transmissions are happening inside, and that's happening across bundles of nerve axons called tracts. And the one that is the most responsible for allowing both brain regions to meet is called the corpus callosum. That probably for me is one of the most beautiful terms in the English language. So when you expose people to certain conditions, most especially laying down in a horizontal position, closing the eyes, developing contexts of trust and surrender, especially music, these are tools in which a lot of electricity starts to pass through. The people who experiences that the most aren't just geniuses and crazy people, it's people undergoing epileptic seizures. So when you do study the nature of the work that we're doing, this is not a Kundalini rising or inner dance model. These are Kundalini, these are epileptiform phases. This is the tonic phase that lasts sometimes seconds or a few minutes, and this is the clonic phase. There's very, very little difference between the work that we do and the epileptic seizures. Is that we are reformulating that maybe there's spiritual or energetic ways of looking at it. People who've studied Kundalini over the years understand that epilepsy is the nearest phenomena that is able to explain what is happening through the surges of electricity that starts to spread out either through the exposure of certain foods. If the moon is full, expose people to flashing lights. Music would be the easiest tool to light up the corpus callosum, the arcuate fasciculus. These are severely important in allowing the brain regions to interconnect with each other. So in Maya, we actually have not just one, but several types of EEGs. We have 3 types of electroencephalograms. So when we expose people to music, not just talking about spiritual people or healers, but students themselves. Students in Palawan are learning the exact things that we conduct in trainings for people who want to hold space. We teach them brain science, energy processes, but we show them the actual waves that are traveling throughout the brain. So were you to really understand this, partly what you would study begins with what are brain waves? What do each of them do? Where does delta, theta, alpha, beta, gamma like to surge? And then what do these regions do? This is like a brain map, but this is also a soul map, and it's a body map, and it could also be the map of the human. Evolutionary speaking, we've developed this over millions of years, and there's a metacognition arising where we're becoming aware of our own awareness. So if you want to continue the mind-body separation that was established by deep thinkers like Plato or Buddha or Descartes, right now the mind and the body are coming into oneness because we do live in the body and we're not canceling out the body anymore. We're becoming aware of the body as a container for spirit and a kind of home that won't just go away unless we just decide, okay, I'm tired of this and I don't like the body and so forth. So the closest spiritual study of the body would be the nature of electricity. So I would invite you to study this, especially if you were to really conduct a therapy, because the understanding of the lobes, and you might go deeper into the gyruses. Each of these maps have different representations. Like the most interesting mapping for most people coming from the type of work that we do is light language. Light language has a particular place, which is here. It's the Broca's area. There's a type of this is a type of aphasia where we lose the normal language function. There are other cognitive functions that could be affected in the work that we do, but light language is one that is easily affected, which is an effect of the spreading of activation, especially that takes place in the arcuate fasciculus, which connects the Broca's area with the Wernicke's area, but also the corpus callosum. Um, ex extend electrical pathways enough in a person's brain, they will experience light language. And when you study this area, which is responsible for language production, it's just in one side. So for most people, and most people would be right-handed, this would be in the left hemisphere of the brain. If your participant is left-handed, their Broca's area will be in the right side of the brain. So over the years, we have observed people who lost their capacity to talk. This doesn't just happen to people experiencing epilepsies or inner dance. This happens to saints. This happens. It's one of the symptoms of the energies of transformation. It's not just that. Within the superior temporal gyrus, there's a part that coordinates language comprehension. So if you were to experience this state in which you hear people saying words and you're like, okay, don't understand what they're saying. They're like B-A-B-Y. I don't know what that means. Or, it's like it's what electricity does. It's what it means to become a baby. One of the things that happens is you lose the power to name things because that naming, in fact, creates boundaries, containers, and limitations for a much deeper, essential understanding of whatever phenomena. It's like peeling away the skins of an onion until you get to the middle where everything is just source. And so it's very beautiful to think about that, but it's not easy to do that if you have to do a marketing presentation or a SWOT analysis or a business plan or even taking care of the kids. Or if you're a teacher in school, you could try to use your body movements in order to do that. These are really useful things to learn when we affect people's brains. Basically, if you're going to affect people's brains, let's study this together. Don't be overwhelmed. This take months, years, and later when you go in depth, then the neurotransmitters and hormones would be interesting. Let's go back to the map. Maybe let's go into some quick rundowns on some of the basic elements. So the ANS is a starting point for that. Autonomic nervous system, which is to say something is something is autonomous, which means something acts on its own wisdom without your mind having to control things. Something controls your heart rate and the stroke volume, cardiac output. Something's controlling your breath. Something's controlling your sleep-wake cycle. Something is controlling your reproductive system. Something's controlling your digestion. Thermoregulation controls body temperature. And you notice very often when you're working in someone or in your own body, temperature shifts. So something is in control. I could just keep going on and on. Something controls pain centers, pleasure. So what we're doing is we're actually accessing the thing that is in control, and we're learning to control that which was in control. And the way we're doing that is by letting go of control, of the mind. The more you let go of control, the more you actually gain control. So we just need to understand what is controlling, what is controlling, what is controlling. There are many pathways and avenues to that, because there are many. I can't itemize them right now, but the in-between space, there would be the study of the way electricity or energies flow through. Now, when you study the nervous system, the chemicals of the brain are fast acting, yes, you can alter states of awareness very, very quickly, but circuitry is also short term. So maybe you're shifting awareness and experience, but very often if the changes are happening only in the nervous system, then the changes don't actually last very long. If you would like to know what is long lasting, then you're not just looking at circuitry, you would be looking at what's called chemistry. Chemistry is not just the neurotransmitters, it's to do with hormones. And when you study hormones, there would need to be an understanding of the endocrine system. So maybe study that from a spiritual mapping. Then you can even bring up something like the chakra system, So let's say this is violet, this might be red, this could be orange, yellow, blue, indigo, red, orange, yellow, blue, no, green. What am I doing? Green, blue, indigo. Then a lot of energy workers are realizing that you can in fact map things out. So red could be, let's say, the pancreas, because the digestion system endocrinally could be mostly related to that color. This could be the gonads, which are the reproductive organs, which in the female would be the ovaries, in the male it would be the testes. The adrenal system could be the adrenal cortex or the adrenal medulla, and then you might be in the blue, you might be talking about the thyroid system. Now, and in the I'm so confused here. I'm sorry. I've just been doing so many of these calls. The green, this is the green, this is the thymus. And then the blue is the thyroid. And then the indigo would be the pineal system. In the middle would be the hypothalamus and the pituitary. So if you try to understand that which is control of what is in control, there's a central control system that manages all of these. So were you to learn to manage the thing in the middle, you would actually help to regulate or manage all of these autonomically or simultaneously. The thymus is responsible for immunity. And this thing keeps moving. Immunity. The blue, a lot of people accord to expression. The thyroid is in fact responsible for metabolism. So energy workers are very, very interested in the yellow because the yellow holds power. What we don't realize is when we automatically focus on that, like a space, we're focusing on the adrenal gland. So when people like to sit on bellies, I used to do that, Flor knows that, like poke around the solar plexus. This is responsible not just for excitement, but also stress management, fear. So what we release would be like epinephrine, cortisol, norepinephrine, aldosterone. The gonads, as we know, is reproductive, and then digestion. The pineal gland is interesting. A lot of people say, okay, it's a third eye, but the pineal gland's central role has to do with sending out melatonin that is responsible for bringing us into the dream state, REM state, which is really important in establishing insight. So even when we're sleeping, it doesn't mean we're unconscious or not thinking. We can dream awake. So there might be ways to think about the pineal system as not something that just has to do with putting us to bed, but it can bring about visions or like more vast ways of processing knowledge. So when you have this map, it may not be too hard to maybe think about the chemicals, like you might think about chemicals like oxytocin. A lot of people say oxytocin is the love hormone. Oxytocin is responsible for the birthing process. This is important for all of us because oxytocin is the chemical responsible for trust. And it's virtually impossible to facilitate a process without the release of oxytocin. So when you keep adding that, when you start noticing that the body starts to go into the motions of giving birth, the oxytocin is responsible for creating the contractions that happens during the stages of labor. So if you were supporting women in preparing themselves for the birthing process, the work that we do is very, very powerful. Why would you induce a birthing by giving people synthetic oxytocin, like synthesized oxytocin like pitocin? If you know how to tap into the autonomic nervous system, then the oxytocin is released in the posterior pituitary gland, and what controls that is the hypothalamus. So there could be the like oxytocin. Let's rewrite that. We have a way of releasing melatonin. Melatonin is released through the dark light stimulus. So when it gets dark, you send out melatonin that brings you closer to the dream state. But just asking someone to lay down, to close their eyes and exposing to certain sounds, you can actually send out melatonin mysteriously. And we just make a list. Let's say epinephrine. Sometimes this is called adrenaline, or norepinephrine or noradrenaline. There's cortisol. There is acetylcholine is the parasympathetic way of relaxing people. A lot of you know serotonin, which is responsible for joy and happiness. Dopamine would be the one that is the most easily sent out, and dopamine is responsible for expectations and anticipation, also addiction. So we know that a lot of participants are expecting too much or wanting too much. So when we train people to depend on the dopamine cycle, it might be powerful in the beginning, but in the long term, you are doping people. You are putting people in danger because too much dopamine, and the company that has earned the most from the dopamine release would be Meta, like Instagram or Facebook. Self-validation, every time you get a like, a thumbs up, you send out dopamine, and that really doesn't stop. The moment you get that, you want more and more and more. Too much dopamine could, in fact, reduce the chances of serotonin getting sent out. So knowing that serotonin is responsible for happiness and joy, dopamine, a lot of people think dopamine is for happiness. It's not. It's for wanting to be happy. But when you want, you actually cannot have it. um and then the other effects of, so meaning wanting, which is not having, which is addiction. The other meaning, not, you're not happy, you're not joyful. The other is too much dopamine would lead to ego inflation and stupidity, and specifically that has something to do with the it's something to do with prolactin. Prolactin is responsible for producing mother's milk in women. Men have it too. And prolactin becomes a precursor for what's called oligodendrocytes, a very, very expensive word. Oligodendrocytes. Oligodendrocytes become the white matter in brain. Remember, like in the outer layers of your brain, you have the neocortex, which is gray, but underneath it's actually white. And the reason why it becomes white isn't because mother's milk is white. Mother's milk is actually made of red blood cells. So babies are vampires, they're sucking blood rather than just milk. Oligodendrocytes are responsible for myelination. So myelin is what protects the synaptic connection. If a lot of you probably know what a synapse is. Let's say this is a neuron, this is another neuron. What connects the neurons would be this would be axon terminals, and this would be dendrites. The connections, for them to be strengthened, there has to be the protective layer and this is called myelin. For you to establish wisdom, brilliance, and genius and knowledge, when your synapses are myelinated, that means that the transmission of information would be 100 to 1,000 times faster, and the distance of information would be also a lot farther. So when there's too much energy processed and not enough rest periods, or rest periods doesn't mean stop doing it. It just means what vibrations are you holding that's not just trying to create the cathartic, the kriya, the release. Myelination happens in the sleep stage, especially. That's called this is the journey into the REM state. It's here. It's N3 stage, which is also called slow wave sleep. And in the sleep stages, this is when you'll be experiencing the most delta state. Okay, this is the most relaxed. This is the deepest. This is when short-term memory is shifting into long-term memory. So it's very important when you design the journey that you don't forget to create this really deep state called non-REM 3 or slow wave sleep, because that's when brilliance, genius is where you're creating not just um I don't know, like aliens, but also like Einsteins. And I mean, aliens are smart, so that's actually a really bad example, but like so, so that's why you want to be cognizant, and I'm glad that Flor is holding space there, because there are numerous trainings happening around the world where people are just trained to release energy, and people are actually getting instructions to say, okay, you need to stop thinking, because every time you're thinking, then it's bad, so you stop using your mind. When you keep doing that, there is a virtual loss of certain cognitive functions. I noticed people have been doing energy work for so many years, they actually lose memory. They would whisper to me, there's some of the more popular people, but they'd whisper to me, Pi, I actually am forgetting a lot of things in the short term. And then later, the episodic memories start to go away. We're setting into motion some kind of spiritual Alzheimer's or dementia. So you might be experiencing a lot of energy, but the thinking process stops. And what we would implicate is,
I,
yes, go ahead.
you disappeared there for a while. Can you repeat just
Sorry.
what,
Where?
2 minutes, 3 minutes?
Ah,
Yeah.
oops. Okay. Where did you lose me? Did-
Why the brain and synapses. When he zoomed out, we cannot see the typing.
ah,
Okay. That, you're talking about me, actually.
You're
yeah,
talking
losing.
about.
Yeah, so talking about Flor. I'm talking
So
about
you were
me.
talking about the non-REM three,
Yeah, okay.
non-REM three. When we
Okay, all
must
right.
make time for that.
So I was talking.
That's the
Okay,
last part.
okay. I Yeah, so that's actually reflexive of what I was talking about, like passing out and forgetting and disappearing. So I'm saying that a lot of facilitators are trained musically speaking or energetically speaking. Okay, when you start a session, you start really slow, and then you go up, and then you go up, and then you just keep going up and up and up and up until you're super high. When you study the real journey of the brain in circadian rhythms, the more it goes high, the more it needs to go down. So in the journey into the dream process, we need to go into deep, slow wave before we can go higher. So what we're mixing is low allows for high. Because usually when we're overthinking, we're stuck here. But what we really need are the higher brain waves. Let's say gamma would be maybe 30 to 100. High oscillating frequencies would even be beyond that. So you want people to go higher, you need to go lower. So that's when the myelination happens. So a category mistake people conduct is when we're taught to go high, And I'm guilty of that too. That's why I had to take a long break and understand what I was doing. Too much energy would lead to mindlessness. And if you want to balance things out, there's nothing wrong with energy. If you want people to function, then too much dopamine functions without understanding the roles of the other neurotransmitters and hormones. It would be really difficult to very often you're just gonna make things up. You're gonna wing it. You're going to throw stuff out there, seeing, okay, I hope something happens. Maybe something happens and it's not what you idealize as a good thing. So especially when you work with young children, parents, and schools, a lot of these would be interesting. So I'm just inviting you in the long term, understand your circuitry and understand your chemistry. And once you get to that point, you would be like Flor and Andre. When you study what is called music, not just coming up with what's nice on Spotify, which is called OPM, which is other people's music. When you start to learn to express music that's coming from the energy itself, when the energy becomes a music producer, or better yet, why not like a DJ? Let's say your DJ energy. A lot of your ability to DJ, the energy would be DJing circuitry and chemistry. So when you study the brain and then you study the music, they go together. And you would realize that there are different dimensionalities of brain and music. Primarily, that is there's what is called code. This would be closer to there would be code and context as different branches of cognitive functions. I'm not going to go too deeply into this, but there is a structuralism between linguistics, psychology, the philosophy of mind, and anthropology that understands you can either go extremely into one side or the other side. This would be more space, and this would be more time. You either become very, very sequential, and you either become very, very simultaneous. So when people are becoming spacey, then yeah, it's hard to live in the world when you're too much here. The oversensitivity to energy can often come about through here. So the trick is to be both. It's to be Asian and European. It's to be cold and hot. It would be masculine and feminine. So you want to adopt many different styles, and music would be a powerful tool in expressing that understanding. But later, beyond music and obviously touch, there would need to be an understanding of the power of words. Because words are always going to be the most contained channeling. It can't just be about light language. Words are in fact the inventions of humans that allowed us to move from sounds and images. That when you study the brain, words are sound images. A word is actually a sound image, and the line that separates the two is movement. It's the dance. The movement allows us to navigate space or spatial awareness, and the many sounds that might have been collected through our migration out of Africa into different elements and parts of the world, Africa and the Middle East. And then the images that we have accumulated, then a lot of them would move into semanticity. And mediating that would be the land of symbols, which is something that takes place in the mind of a 3-year-old or a 2-year-old that is only going into language acquisition. So a lot of for a baby and many animals don't have brains. It doesn't mean they're stupid. It's just that dimensionally they're experiencing categorization and ontologies in different orders of thinking there's an in-between space, and most likely in the human, that is the toddler years. Before you acquire language, there would be symbolizations, which would mediate when energies are very raw, where you're simply taking in the vibrations of the world and the imagery of the world. And when you combine that, the middle line being the way you move your body across space and time, language would appear. So we would study language just as much as we'd study tactician and all the other senses to do with pain or pleasure, balance, electricity, magnetism, equilibrium, and so on and so forth. So let me do a time check. It's 7 o'clock. Okay. I could end with this as a lecture point for now. I'll try to close a little bit. Let me get rid of the screen. Later on, it is possible to expand this to some really deep questions people have, like the one about movement. When the body moves in a certain way, does that mean anything? The answer is yes, and we would need to come into a partnership with embodied cognition and the cognitive sciences that understands how information is mapped out in the brain in what is called conceptual metaphors or image schemas or spatial primitives. This is autonomic knowledge, how the baby experiments in the beginning in terms of containment, source path goal, verticality, balance. It's the first knowledge systems before we go into abstract thinking, where then we have ideas like freedom, truth, love. To a baby, babies don't think in abstract terms. They use their senses because they're not judging it. They don't have value judgments that this is dark, this is light. A lot of those concepts are embedded. They're not technically activated, they're potentiated in the DNA. And then when the DNA goes into cellular genesis, creating a whole body where the potentials are there upon birth, we activate a lot of these patterns based on our response mechanisms to what's happening outside. So the movements in the beginning, this could have actually started in the womb itself, so that every time a baby moves a certain way, the baby's already creating a wiring because of the simultaneous firing of neurons that then would potentiate and lead to an actualization of what's called a thought or a speech pattern that later would become like concepts. A lot of that wisdom begins with the body. And so if we wanted to understand how a mind would shift or undergo a transformation, to go back to the body means to then go into what are the basic primitives, so that if I wanted to change my mind, if I wanted to heal my anger and my traumas, I have to start at the beginning. I have to dream that it's actually possible to restart my life, to go back to the beginning. And I think becoming a baby, understanding that so much of our findings points to the autonomic nervous system of the baby. I think this is the greatest gift we can give to many people who are coming from like just biases and judgments, thinking the world isn't going to change because it's always going to be like that. We can really ground this now. We are doing it. We're conducting some really amazing experimentations, research programs. We're only beginning now, primarily because we only have a theory of what is happening, a critical theory, not just like a general theory, but we have many proposals that could be acceptable in scientific discourse. But I'm glad we are finally gathering data. I don't think this was possible some years ago. but I'm really, really excited that this is starting now. So I want to open the space for questions whilst we're together. Maybe in the future we meet, maybe we get to go to the Middle East, or we see you in Palawan. Flor will be with us in and out, or we see you in Europe or somewhere in the world. So maybe we have about 20 plus minutes. Yeah, come close so I could hear you. State your name and where you're from.
Your country and everything. He's interested in this.
My name is Mariam. I'm Emirati. And I like what you shared was so interesting. I feel like I've been looking for balance for the past few years. And I'm very interested in how you connected chemicals with sound, and how we can basically that we have some control over the chemicals in our body, as opposed to just feeling based on the happenings of life around us. And I'm first of all, I'm really curious if you have a university or a school. I'm really interested in learning more about this. But my question is, when I'm facilitating for myself, how do I know what chemicals I need to reduce? What chemicals do I need to increase? And how do I do that with sound for myself?
Let's stay with that because it's a really big question to begin with. Thank you for your question. Let's go back to the screen. So yes, we have a university. It's called the Universe. Meaning I've facilitated tens of thousands of people over the years by 2017. So because I facilitated about 60 nationalities by that time. Right now, probably more. So because this has been a global movement, we've gathered the feedbacks and we worked with the scientists. The difficult thing about chemistry is the experimentations are rather invasive. So even scientists with laboratories, it's not easy to really go into the heart of hormones and neurotransmitters. So what we have are at least research that have developed generalizations. And then we worked with the doctors and some science oriented people. In general, there really are, there's not that many when you know how to categorize. So there could be what you call the stimulants. So some people call that the uppers. And then you have the depressants. And so some people might call that the downers. And yes, we do long trainings. It could be like we're conducting a 1-year training program. Flor is collaborating with that because we think it takes a year. We used to do 6 months, and this is entirely online. In Palawan, we do 15-day programs. A lot of people are familiar with stimulants. That could be anything from coffee to cocaine, nicotine, but there could also be like the chemicals that are inside. So we're talking about orexin, histamine, like epinephrine, adrenaline, dopamine. These are the ones that keep you awake at night, especially cortisol. Cortisol keeps you awake at night. Depressants would be either alcohol, sleeping pills, barbiturates. Inside, then you have the downers like acetylcholine, so on and so forth. Balance is really interesting. So let's put a line in between. What is that line? A lot of people know that line very well. In rooms like this, I'm sure you know it. When you put together a stimulant and a depressant, do you know what you actually get is a hallucinogenic, or what's called a psychedelic. Literally, when you take, let's say, a lot of coffee and a lot of wine together, you'll go into a magic mushroom or ayahuasca trip. Or if you know how to create those conditions without the outer drugs, the drugs are inside. So this is what we're experiencing through the non-invasive use of sound. You can go on a trip. We're going on a trip. Oops. we're going on trips. So we're clarifying to scientists that you know, like psychedelic assisted therapy is so popular now. But why can't you just use sound? Because a lot of people say we're actually going deeper and we're sustaining the experience a lot longer. Especially when you do go into psychedelics, you go into the crash. You know, you crash the days after. So what we're studying as balance is not just to go in between, but in fact, sometimes when we're not breaking down, we're breaking up or we're breaking through. Balance could be not just finding the space in between, but an abundant expression of both. And the reason why we're not experiencing walking down the street on magic mushrooms without magic mushrooms is because we had to construct a way to separate stimulation and depression. Oops. Let's just put more of something like this. When we're supposed to take care of the kids, go to work, or in olden times, let's say hunt for the mammoth, the saber tooth, look for food, forage. We knew that there were better times in the circadian rhythms to do that. You know, what time of the day would I do that? Then that would be like that time of the day. And then what time of the day is it better to just close your eyes because it's going to be dark out and you know the enemy tribe or the lions are sleeping. So you then send out these other neurotransmitters. So what we realize right now is this is really getting confused because when you live in places like Hong Kong, Singapore, London, New York, Berlin, at times of the day when it's supposed to be really, really dark, then we're creating artificial lighting, and that probably includes Dubai. I haven't been to Dubai, but I'm sure people aren't going to bed at 7 o'clock at night or 8 o'clock at night. So people are then going to these habits. Okay, it's the sun's coming out. They need to drink a lot of coffee, and then when they overstimulate themselves, then okay, now I can't sleep because I drank coffee in the afternoon. Now I need to drink a lot of wine. So in a way, we're becoming psychedelic as a species or as a planet. And a lot of these habits weren't, in fact, common in Europe. People didn't really drink coffee. Coffee came about from Turkey, and it was transported to Europe through colonization. And so now people in the West are overstimulating themselves, and because they're not used to it, then we discovered oil, and then the Middle East got rich, and now people have light at night all over the world. Now they're mixing this up. Like over the last years, we're actually mixing up night and day. Like in the Philippines, we are the next to India, we're the call center capital of the world. So one of the biggest industries is having people going into the graveyard shift. So a lot of problems is being caused by what's called sleep deprivation. The sleep wake cycle is super off. And a lot of you who are conducting deep work, you're probably witnessing a lot of changes in both of these. Um, when I lived on the island for 2 years, eating coconuts and not eating food, I was actually sleeping about just about 5 hours per week. Maybe it's a little bit more, but when you experience REM state awake, you don't actually need to go to sleep. When you're not with other people and you don't have obligations, you don't need to sell anything, buy stuff. You're living your highest potential. We're going to sleep at night because we're having to go into energy conservation when we live in a world based on energy consumption and energy competition. So when we come into the more natural flow, um, we would go back to how stimulants and depressants might have been. But I think that's an incomplete picture. I think we're creating a lot of people are talking about the new earth, which is actually becoming less and less possible. But we can't create a new earth without creating a new human. And we can't create a new human without creating a new brain. So I do want to put a positive spin to the observation that we are experimenting with the body using what's called psychotropic mechanisms, not just hallucinogenic plant or non-plant medicine. We're experimenting with our bodies because if you wanted like a study of okay, where how do I study this? The concept is called homeostasis. Homeostasis. It's the body's ways of trying to achieve balance. And when you do look at stimulation and depression, just to give people maybe some advice for those who are doing energy work, not just for yourself, but your participants. Depression. Homeostasis works like this. When you're stimulating too much, what happens is when people start to adopt a habit of stimulation, say it could be certain drugs or too much coffee, what your body does is if it knows that you're going to drink too much caffeine again, or you're going to go into an energy process that's really cathartic again, what happens is your body will release depressants ahead of time in order to protect you from having a heart attack. Let's say people are wanting to explode, have a catharsis, jump off airplanes, or to take too much cocaine or meth, or then the body would try to protect itself. And that's why tolerance hits, which is the moment where people are saying, I'm not getting the hit anymore. Why am I not feeling it? It's because of this homeostatic reflex that's inbuilt in the body that's very, very old. So people who are exposed to too much stimulation, there will be a tendency that there's an abundance of depressant chemicals. People who are laggard, kind of slow moving, slow thinking, slow speaking, they have an overexpression of depressant chemicals. So they need more stimulants, and the body's actually trying to find those. But there's something in the psyche that sometimes prevents that from happening. So if we want to conduct a therapy that brings balance, for example, a lot of people get interested in the work in addiction. Okay, like, oh, I want to heal people with addiction. The first question is, are they addicted to uppers or downers? Because the type of work that you would do for meth addicts won't be the same for those who are on heroin or painkillers. So then you would study their brain waves and their chemistries. You would give them the other side of what they're not able to hold. And when that is enough, then you would step back to see if they can generate those chemistries on their own without you needing to intervene, therefore creating a dependency. I don't know if that helps, but this kind of simplifies something that then. Thank you.
Thank you so much. That really helps.
You're welcome.
Hi,
All
all Emiratis are
Emiratis first. Emiratis first. Okay.
Hi, Pi. How are you? I'm Salama. I'm from the U.A.E. So my question is about the the part where you talked about the brain. You mentioned something about light language, and then on the other side, was it where you said like there's where it's channeled like codes or like letters and numbers?
Yeah.
Yeah,
Okay,
that's what I
so
wanted to ask about.
I guess you'd like us to put more information into this. So light language is interesting. It's okay. So thinking is bound by language. We think language is just speech, but language is in fact like the lexicon or the library of meaning. So that when people go into an awakening experience, that library, let's say it's like a room and you like to organize your room. Let's say you're not happy with your room anymore. So you would hire an interior designer to reorganize your room. Interior design is the same acronym as inner dance. So when you rearrange your library, you would actually rearrange your meaning making or meaning comprehension capacities. So from an evolutionary perspective, language is bound by rules. So when you combine certain letters, it makes up a word. And a lot of us, we speak several languages. So you can either combine sounds, those are called morphemes or phonemes, that then would create like a word or a phrase. You combine the words together, then you would have a sentence. Now, light language is either speaking like an alien, an animal, an angel, or a baby. Now, babies speak light language in a way that they utter the 800 phonemes that make up every single human language. So babies utter the universal language, maybe from a biblical sense before the Tower of Babel. So then the more we grow up, we actually need to prune or get rid of a lot of those existing connections in order to speak in more limited ways now with words and accent and speech patterns, tonalities, and so on and so forth. So when we go into light language, we're throwing a lot of those away, and what binds them are rules. So for those who, my favorite example is a famous character in a science fiction movie called Yoda. Do you know Yoda, the little green man? When Yoda speaks, he messes up the combinations or the order of the sentences. So understand him hard, not, it doesn't make sense because he's starting to recombine words thus so that an ending, beginning not clear. When babies grow up, they actually start experimenting with those combinations until they learn the rules. So when you open the mind, you break the rules. And a lot of those are localized in the brain. So language production is localized in the Broca's area, and then language comprehension is localized in the Wernicke's area. So when your question is about code and context, there are different ways in which the loss of language happens. And this was studied in psychology and linguistics many decades ago. And I think this hasn't been studied enough. There are people who lose their language centers either in a spiritual process or through some kind of emergency where either you become more, let's say, Asian or European. Asian from, let's say, a Japanese or Filipino or Chinese sense, which is, these are cultures that are not individualistic, they're more collective or tribal. There are communities that don't believe in the person, they believe in the community. And then there are cultures that believe more in the individual before the community. So code would be more the ego, where there could be an inability to name certain words. So people would say, okay, I'm trying to think of it. This is the thing that you put in your mouth that usually makes your stomach full, that becomes poop. They can say stuff like that, but sometimes they can't even say the word food. There was this time when there was this woman, she was Chinese, living in London. And I once just, after a deep experience, I just sat in front of her and I said the words, tell me your name. And then literally she looked around and I could see her expression. She was so terrified. She couldn't even say, her name was 2 letters. It's J-O. And she couldn't even say Joe. So for an hour, I watched her laughing, crying. She couldn't limit the essence of her being into those 2 letters. So she lost language production. Now, there are other people who don't lose language that way. The name for that is aphasia. Aphasia is the word. You could experience aphasia either through a stroke or a lesion in the brain, or when you send a lot of electricity in the brain, which happens in epilepsy and also in energy work. Other people, they may say a lot of words, but they start to recombine you're breaking the rules. They start to sound like Yoda. So when you don't just mess up the words, when you start to mess up the combinations of the letters, that's what light language is about. So somehow we had evolved through multiple infinite combinations of the letters. So we decided that BABY is that in English, and maybe in Arabic, there are other words that we decided that this is what that means because I need to communicate or transact or negotiate meanings. So we could build these cities and we can organize the earth. So there's something in the human that's allowing for the reorganization process. And for you to then study like layerings and functions, different playlisting styles, different energy techniques could either bring people into code or context. Now, again, code is more into space, context is more into time. If you had, let's say, a whole week to talk about this, then we can unravel what that means. But it's already interesting to know that there are differentiations. Here's the choice. Either you can bring people into the person. I'm not going to invalidate that. It's actually beautiful to witness like who you are as an identity or as a person. But sometimes we will get bored with a person that's always going back to the trauma, to the stories, like again and again, like going around in a circle. What would it mean for you to experience the planet? Right? That's code to witness the universe, the cosmos. So there are certain sounds and touches and context holding that can, it's up to you. Do you want to become a planet, a universe, or do you want to become a person? I think the answer is both. I don't think you can just be a planet, but the resources of the person is very limited. So we need to borrow from our oldness. So if we were to come up with a philosophy and a neurology and a linguistics, what I advise people to start out with is study the fundamental matrix or grid that structures who we are, and that's called time and space. So some of the techniques that could be studied is like rhythm. When you change the rhythm in music, what you're affecting is the heartbeat. And there are certain BPMs that measures the heart that are connotative to the BPM in music. So there are certain BPMs that are more or less what we can recognize as normal heartbeats and normal music. And when you go lower than that and higher than that, you can actually bring people into dimensions that they're not used to. That's how you can bring people into the cosmos, because when you're going beyond what normal music is, then dimensions there are sort of like new brain, new music. That for me is super exciting, that we in fact have control over the vibratory priming of the experience, so that. But a lot of people right now, what they're using is music that is available on the radio or in Spotify. There are new genres of music that's coming out of the work that we're doing. So we teach people how to use certain applications, programs, synthesizers, groove boxes that can either increase the tempo to beyond what's called the rate of greatest salience, that would break through existing rules. Then we can bring them back. Yeah, I hope that's a little bit what you were expecting and not expecting. Thank you.
Thank you. It's more than I've expected. Thank you so much.
Anyone else has a question? You want to come here?
Maybe one or two more.
It's all the U.A.E nationals that are asking you, Pai.
Hi. My curiosity is about two things. First is if in a state where somebody, because we haven't experienced everything, right? There's certain parts of the brains. So for example, the light language, let's say somebody is in a is experiencing, we're facilitating and somebody's in their inner journey and they're in light language, or they're in the, let's say light language, and I have not experienced it yet. How can I hold space then? That's my first question.
Okay, so this is really, I can understand why this needs to be asked in Dubai, because we know there's a lot of restrictions in your society, especially where women are involved, traditionally anyway. A lot of people are scared of light language and aphasia because these are phenomenon when people are losing control, to the outside observer anyway. To the one who's experiencing it, they may actually be okay, because that happens when they surrender to the process. So the one advice that we would
just-
center around in. Oh, did I lose you?
Yeah,
Did
we can
lose
hear you.
Okay.
It's our speaker.
The one thing that you would focus on is don't lose the trust. When you are facilitating, let's start with you're holding the space. If you're the one holding the space, never send signals as if something was wrong, because the person worked really hard to get there in the beginning. And when you act like something is wrong, you would create the conditions where something wrong is happening, and that would just keep the cycle going. It would make things worse. So then you think about, what can I do that establishes
Like this, I think. This is wonderful. It's fine.
yeah, okay.
You're good.
Establish
It's fine.
transformations and shifts. So especially with the use of
Shut
music,
off, maybe, please.
what's happening?
Sorry.
Sorry, we're having problem with the speaker. Just please switch that off. And if you cannot hear, can you just please come here?
The connection
We're
is
just
getting
gonna
alarm.
keep the
Let me
computer.
let your MacBook Pro
So one
speaker.
behind.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah.
Select the speaker, yes. The thing is off.
Okay now. Okay. All right.
Yeah.
So with me.
So our one advice would be that we want to make sure that there's really high element of trust in the space. So the space holders can never lose that. If we understand the 12 stages and the way the waves move, very often you can experience light without dark. And then when you study the theory of emotions, is it possible to experience forgiveness without anger? Is it possible to experience joy without despair, or courage without fear? So that's why we do bring people into the dark, so that they would have the experience of responding differently to past reactions that were coming from anxiety or just plain fear. So work with the wave, but at the same time, you need to be very, very strong and very, very constant. Trust is subconscious, because when people do go into normal conditions, the mind would just like switch. The easiest technique would be turn on the lights, if you would like to normalize things. And trust it when the person goes back to, I have to drive the car again and take care of the kids. We haven't really gotten into trouble so much. Right now, we're mixing the music in a way that's not too overstimulating. So work within the cultural context. And I think our most important advice is, when you open the space, or maybe filter people who could come in, no matter what happens, make sure that they are taking responsibility. That no matter what happens, it could be like a demonic possession, or they're taken by the aliens. Make sure they own the process. If there's a chance that there's a blame system that can happen, which is called a projection, that they're saying, okay, it's the nature spirits, it's the entities, it's the devil, then don't let them in, because they are not actually working in themselves. They're looking for dependencies or something to blame, or some outside agency to fix their problems for them. If you are able to attract people who are really doing the work, then you're safe no matter what happens. And that discernment does come from either experience or wisdom and love and embodiment, like mind, heart, and body all rolled into one. So basically, just trust yourself, trust the space. Even when you are in doubt, which is the opposite of trust, trust that doubt. Trust everything.
Okay. Does anyone else want to ask? Because I have
Thank
another
you.
one.
Okay,
And the seizure, same thing?
Yes, everything. Seizures are good. Like, let me tell you, Einstein had seizures, Leonardo da Vinci had seizures. Some of the greatest geniuses in the world were actually epileptics. So we have to trust that when we awaken electricity inside people, it will lead to genius. And like 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 when people were hunting witches and killing sacred women, it's because they were going into these seizures, and we learned to judge them. So when you learn to trust this, you are in fact reversing the history of patriarchal society, and we're going back into the divine feminine. So the seizures are a part of that remembrance.
Thank you. I'm going to.
I think she came first.
I'll take on two because I have to get back to my kids.
Hi, Pi. I'm Kieran. I'm from the US. And my scientific mind has a million questions. And I know that a lot of what I'll learn about it will come from my own experience. But for now, I was just wondering if you could talk about specifically what the studies are that are being done to validate what indications this might be useful for.
Our studies are quite simple right now. It's just learning to ask the right questions. How did you feel before you did the session? How did you feel afterwards? The difficulty in setting up research studies is the benefits are so widespread. So psychiatrists are studying this because this is more powerful than many forms of psychology. Doctors are studying this because this is more effective than when medicines aren't working anymore. Schools are studying this because it seems to develop insight and multiple intelligences that were not studied before. One of the main interesting studies that we're looking at is one of the least likely. So understanding that a lot of this work comes about from the mimicking of the sleep cycle, the going into the REM stages coming from non-REM states. It came upon us last year that why don't we experiment with getting people to use the music while they're sleeping? I'm going to say it again. What if you went into the inner dance while sleeping? So we devised these 3-hour playlists for the use of adults and especially young children, and the results were mind-blowing. We just got like, boom, it's like, wow, like children had physiological, cognitive, emotional disorders, like the feedbacks coming even from parents who were doctors who didn't know anything. We're going to that because that's more, that's safer to introduce to the medical community. It's not weird, and it can be instituted at home, so you don't need a healer. It's the wave itself. I think that's an answer to the question. We want to understand the nature of the wave. A lot of space holders, they don't want to look at that because they want the power to be from the one holding the space. But the real holder is the space itself. So that's actually egoic in a way. The one holding the space is space held. So when we study that this can happen on its own, even without someone there creating a dependency, then let's study the way the energy does rise and fall, and which pattern works and what pattern does not work. So then we can set up control variables. What slight changes that can we make that brings about certain effects? And then if we can create generalizations, then I'll be honest with you, it's only in the last 4 months that we've been using EEGs. I think the choice point would be either that the scientists go through spiritual awakenings, or spiritual people become mad scientists, and start to adapt certain tools. I like to think there has to be a space in between. I'm feeling right now that it would actually be people having spiritual awakenings that learn the science, where we might have a better chance of perceiving certain things about the mind, body, and the brain. Primarily because a lot of the scientific data is based on the observations of static bodies and brains that are not changing. When you do study bodies that are exploding and are transforming, you end up with very, very different coherent insights that were not available to past sciences. So there are scientists that are beginning to study this now, but it's not that easy to get to them because most science-based practitioners are practitioners. They're not working on theory level dimensions, or people who do real research. So we're only starting to come into contact with those people now. So I wouldn't say there is any yet real study that I trust represents the body of work that we hold. I know certain elements that I favor, but they belong to parallels to what we're doing, either studies of the near-death experience that brings about the life review that relates to the autonomic nervous system. The first article to ever come out globally, historically, on like in a scientific journal is coming out in February, and that's going to be in Scotland. A medical journal is coming out that took maybe a year to write. There are people who are trying to write PhDs on this, and it's still also at work. So I'm not going to pretend that we have dissertations and it's super raw, because the theories and understandings are very, very recent. It's only maybe in the last 2 years where we are in working with scientists, we have some solid theses, but we don't have yet the hard data that takes sometimes years to. The funny thing is, even without the data, we know that this works. That is why a lot of doctors are undergoing the trainings. But in an evidence-based world where to see it is to believe it, we have to wait now. So let's work together. Let's work together. Thank you.
Can you mention the journal and the conference that it's going to be presented in, that you've mentioned?
It's
what
just
they
a
are?
journal. I don't remember, but I can send it to Flor. I need to go to my WhatsApp and look at it.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, love to know more about you, and because you're interested in this, just contact us through Flor.
Yes.
Anyone science-based, we're excited to meet. Maybe one last.
Yeah. Hello, Pai. I'm Fernanda from Brazil. I have a question. If you have experience with Alzheimer, Parkinson, stroke, this kind of issues
Yes.
that really damage the brain?
Amazing. Yes, I've had a lot of experimentations on Parkinson's. For one, is easy to understand because Parkinson's happens when there's a damage to the dopamine production and dopamine reception areas of the brain. Understanding that I think to be specific about this, I would need to go in the screen. Let's see. Let's share the screen and then open the iPad and then, okay, because you guys have specific questions, I will be very, very specific with my answers. So let's start with Parkinson's. Wait, background, let's clear the screen. Parkinson's is a is all about damaging the dopaminergic pathway. So dopamine is normally routed to several areas of the brain. That which is responsible for attention is called the prefrontal cortex. Emotions would be the amygdala. Motor programs would have to do with the nucleus accumbens, and memory would be the hippocampus. So when Parkinson's happens, dopamine is decreased or halted from getting sent out. That's why it's very hard, especially to control the body. emotions becomes harder to access. Sorry, this is the body and this is attention. It's hard to pay attention. And sometimes there's cases of memory loss. The work that we do doesn't just sometimes heighten the amount of dopamine that is getting sent out. Remember, dopamine is not just responsible for addiction. It's also responsible for all of these important functions I mentioned. The work that we do is really interesting because we actually reroute dopamine into another part of the brain, and this is called the basal ganglia, which is responsible for setting the rhythm of life, the pulsation of life. And this is the animal brain or the instinctive brain. And it also gates information that passes between the head and the body. So we reroute dopamine here. I'm not going to go too deeply in this for lack of time, but basically what I'm saying is the work that we do raises dopamine levels. It raises dopamine levels. And because Parkinson's lowers dopamine levels, when we support the rising of dopamine levels, then Parkinson's can experience certain normalization. Dopamine could also be implicated amongst other things with Alzheimer's and dementia. So I think were we to get interested in that, the main focus would be the hippocampus and the entorhinal cortex. So we know enough about these two areas in order to navigate how the work that we do can help. So this is memory function, and the other systems these are responsible for is it's more or less like the GPS system of the brain, which is responsible for navigation. In order to set up that GPS system, there needs to be different types of cells. It could be time cells, grid cells, place cells. These are activated through sensation. So when you touch certain objects, you start to understand where is it in the room. So you can see why that's a GPS system. When you have Alzheimer's or dementia, you affect the GPS system in the brain. So a lot of these start to deteriorate or begin to shut down. So one technique that feels effective in the work that we do with Alzheimer's and dementia would be using music has already been proven for many years now through many different studies. Music can affect, could bring back memory functions and control functions. That old people, they start to dance and then they start to emote, they start to remember certain things, and then they start to pay attention. The interesting thing, I think, related to how inner dance has been used is music in its normal form can do something, but when you alter the music, when you create, when you use music that's familiar, music that they know, and for many people experiencing Alzheimer's and dementia, you're looking at maybe in the 1930s, 40s, 50s, that'd be the kind of music, like let's say Sinatra or some classical music, playing the music that they know, that they remember, but then changing the music, either by distorting the music, putting in certain effects, slowing down the speed and speeding it up. This is what is in fact more effective. So a lot of the techniques that facilitators have been using that alter the tempo, change the rhythm, alter the tempo. And the explanation for that is actually related to the reptilian brain or the basic brain. The basal ganglia conducts its functions through rhythm. The basal ganglia determines rhythm because dopamine also contains what are called time cells. We are aware of time through the release of dopamine, and when you disrupt that, then memory can get erased. So when you reset the clock or the pacemaker element of the brain, this is in the brain. The heart has its own pacemaker, and it's called the sinoatrial node. Then it actually could be possible to bring back the functions of it could be like the head direction cells, which is also part of the GPS system. Yeah, just experiment with the rising and falling of the music, which is the simultaneous co-activation of stimulation and depression, sympathetic, parasympathetic switches. And the thing with Alzheimer's, whereas Alzheimer's and dementia is, don't try to make people become normal, like how they used to be. These people are already giving up on their personas because they weren't happy with their emotions and their character to begin with. So ready for them to be new human beings. They're becoming like babies and like children. And when they go through possible stages of development, then be ready that they may not be the same people. That's why you are altering the vibrations. But very often what you are dealing with are people who are also saying goodbye in gentle ways. So there's also, if it is that, then there is nothing wrong with allowing them to access dimensions of mind and body that would help them to say goodbye, buy them a couple more years, and go through a healing process that also heals the people around them. So that's yeah, that's maybe a short introduction and some of the reflections, the meditations and
Thank you.
practices that's been done around these. Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you.
Okay,
Thank
so
you,
thank you.
Pai. Thank you. Say sorry. Say sorry to Sinag. We took him
Yeah,
away from his.
it's good. It's more Isa and Amaya. Okay, so let me know how everything goes, and if there are more questions, I'm happy to work on whatever sound-based answering. If you have Q&As, I can follow up. Flor can give you more materials. We have a lot of content out that's given away for free on YouTube. We have a channel. It's just gonna take a while to peruse about, I don't know if it's 100 videos worth 3 hours each. A lot of them do go around in circles, but we are establishing a 1-year training, which Flor is gonna put out with us. I'm gonna be doing the global calls, and Flor will be doing the local calls, and this is in collaboration with groups in North America, South America, in Asia, in Europe, and Flor is holding the Middle East room. So you can talk to her more about that if you wanted to do some continuous study. Okay, so I'll let you go. Thank you, and hope to see you again somewhere in the world of
Bye, Pai. Love you.
energy. Love you all. Bye.